Parents, you have to become the zealous advocates for your kids, because no one else is going to be a more zealous advocate than you. So you have to approach this as if from day one, the minute you see something happening, you are preparing for a lawsuit or a criminal action.
Welcome back to Finding Common Ground with Heather and Steve. Today we're doing part 2 of our interview with Anil. I'm going to go a little bit off of what we talked about, because as you were speaking, it made me think. Steve and I are working on a lot of different housing initiatives. And we often get to this point where we're like, it would be really wonderful to create an intentional community, something that's planned so they can uplift, and accommodate the people who, have different disabilities. But what the state says is, when you bring all those people with disabilities together and you congregate in one area, you become an institution. And it's just so ironic that the facilities and the communities that they set up are just ripe with abuse and fraud and all these negative things. But they just gave us the choice. If we did have these parent-led communities where families came together and rallied around, a concept or way to pool their resources, people would have a choice. They could choose an Anderson or they could choose the family model. And guess what? People would automatically be drawn to what was safer, what gave them a sense of value and respect. So we have to ask ourselves why other states beyond New York, when they talk about the settings rule, that's what happened with Willowbrook. We decided we don't want that many people in one setting because it becomes an institution. So they think that they're protecting us by saying, if you live with more than 3 people who have a disability, you've become an institution. And they think that protects us. But what it really does is limit us. So I'm glad you're talking about this, because when people say, why does New York, why are they so dead set against intentional or planned communities? It's ironic that it's because they run much like how your experience with Anderson was. So I felt like it was important to call that out. And before we close out on what parents do and how they can move forward, I just want to tell people that if you have a legal case, if you want to press charges, don't run to the news first. Get some counsel. Make sure that you don't say the wrong things publicly. It's really hard because if you're ready to speak out, sometimes you want to tell it all, right? And I know, Anil, that it's taken some strategy and some thoughtfulness, that you can't just fly off the cuff and say everything that you want. You're being very metered and measured right now. And if people are sensing that, I just want them to have an idea of why it's great to speak up, but it's also really good advice to maybe reach out to a lawyer or to learn what your rights are and not destroy your case before you start.
100%. You do not want to be caught in a situation where you slander somebody or you make an allegation that cannot be substantiated. So to that end, I would suggest the following, which is that if you are suspecting that your child is being abused and you're having communications with the staff or the school or the residents, realize one thing. Our legal system is based upon proof. That's it, right? And sometimes it's really mind-boggling, the levels of proof that we have to present to prove the point. But for the video of my son, he probably, this case wouldn't have happened. This wouldn't have come out. So I say to parents, what you need to do is you need to start documenting. You need to start being very vigilant in what you say and how you say it. If you're on a phone call, record it. You don't need to tell the other party. If you're in New York State and the other party's in New York State is a one-party consent state. Mm-hmm. If one party knows that they're being recorded, you don't need to tell anybody on the other side of the phone that you're being recorded. When you call your school to discuss, either with a nursing staff or the housing staff or with CEO or with anybody else, record the conversation. Have 2 phones. If you have a smartphone on one side, just start recording and put it next to the speakerphone of the other smartphone next to it. Catalog it. Put the date. Make sure that when you get those files, you label them. You put a little memo. What was the context of it? If you have anything substantive to send it by email, and make sure you send it to all relevant parties, including the CEOs or the people in charge of those organizations, because you have to make sure that they are on notice. And nothing is better to prove that they're on notice than an email with a date and a timestamp. And be organized. You have to be, lawyers, when full disclaimer, I went to law school. I'm trained as a lawyer, so I have the benefit a little bit of that background. But you have to become parents. You have to become the zealous advocates for your kids, because no one else is going to be a more zealous advocate than you. So you have to approach this as if from day one, the minute you see something happening, you are preparing for a lawsuit or a criminal action. Remember, criminal actions a criminal case is very important because it helps get these people out of the system who have done something, heinous of this nature. And two, if it is proven, it'll go a long ways towards your civil case as well and providing justice for your loved one. So parents, you need to be organized. You need to think about this holistically. And I know it's overwhelming. This is not a small task. It is overwhelming. But, take a breather. If you can, step back and understand that this is going to be a marathon. It's not a sprint. So try to put the foundation in place so that in 1 year or 2 years, you can get the right justice for your child.
Right. And Steve, you just recently interviewed Flora Ramirez, and she's part of the Ombuds program in New York. It's called the IDDO. And I think this is a perfect time to tell our audience, if you are in New York State, if your loved one has IDD and is either already through the front door and has OPWDD or waiver services, or if they're trying to get them, the IDDO is a great resource. Are there any tidbits that you learned from that interview, Steve, that you think would be helpful?
No, except that she's an attorney also, and I do believe that she's very sincere in trying to get to the bottom of some of this stuff. Look, politics are always going to come into play. They're all state agencies and stuff like that, but there are sincere ones out there willing to help, and I believe that particular office is sincere in trying to help. You will get feedback in that kind of stuff. Same as the new office, the director of advocacy office. I found them to be extremely in listening mode and trying to help. They were working on some projects just that I'm working on that try and help some families, and they've been all in and trying to resolve them. All difficult situations. Anil has elegantly talked about his own case, and we don't want any more of that stuff. And I go back to the fact that one bad apple can spoil a whole bunch. And I go back to where I said in the very beginning with the disclaimer that we don't want to discount the good DSPs, the good workers out there, the good staff, even the ones that are passionate at some of the agencies, including OPWDD. But if there's bad ones, we got to get them out of there. We have to find a way to get them out of there somehow. And, if his safe care plan can help with that, so be it.
I agree.
The staff that work with my son every day, when they first came to my home, I obviously had to explain to them what happened to my son. And then I also explained to them what we're trying to achieve here. And I say to them, because some of them do have, other, part-time jobs or other, jobs at some of these institutions. I say to them, I say, guys, if you aren't, you guys will call you one of the good ones, right? Because obviously, you're vetted and you're here at doing a good job. But if you see something, you need to speak up. You need to report, because like you just said, Steve, one bad apple will taint the whole bunch. And that's what we have right now. We don't have, it's not like 90% of the DSPs out there are hurting our kids, right? But the ones that are, they're doing a massive amount of harm and damage, and that affects what everybody thinks of everyone in this space. Right. This is a hard job, right? They can get, at times they may get physically assaulted, right? They have to have composure. They have to be able to take a hit and understand that that person is not hitting you because they want to hurt you. They may be hitting you because they're going through some type of self-regulation or some type of crisis internally, and that's the only way that they can express it, right? But if you are not a person who has a calling or a desire to be in this industry, get out.
Right. And I think if people take nothing else away from this, there's a time in everyone's life where they go, it's time for me to shift. It's time for me to move on. Even if a DSP or a caregiver is a good person on the inside, if they are burnt out, if they are exhausted, if they can't give our children the compassion and the patience that they need at least a timeout. They need a break, right? They need to be able to tap out, do something different. And parents have to trust their gut. When something
Yes,
feels off,
it is
don't
off.
try to rationalize it. Because what some families will do is say, I can't bring my child home. I'm not equipped. We don't have the capacity to bring them home. They have to stay where they are. And to make that okay, sometimes we silence the reality. We don't
Right.
let ourselves feel it. So just for a minute, think, when I'm not here, nobody else is going to have these red flags that seem so obvious to them. No one's going to be looking at our child the same way we look at them through our eyes. We have to figure this out now while we're here. So thank you, Anil. You have the last show we talked about technology that could be used to document and train. That was powerful. But this safe care concept, making parents the lead in a team that supports their child, empowers everybody. It empowers us as families. We get to finally take that role that we really want, but it also builds the team so we know that we don't have to do it forever. So thank you
Right.
so much for coming
No,
back
I appreciate
today.
that. I appreciate that, Heather, and in the work you and Steve do. Look, this is a long term, and this is going to be a very long term project. It's Safe Care is not just about bringing, you know, proper staff to help some of these kids in crisis. We're also looking at creating safe care homes, where in the homes there will be cameras installed. We hope it can create some type of campus setting, so there's a social component to it. I'd like to create an Anderson campus without the abuse, but of course, operating costs are the challenge. Right? This goes back to the comment you made earlier about Willowbrook and the
Mhm.
deinstitutionalization in New York State. I think one thing people they just react. Willowbrook happened, and Willowbrook was an atrocity. Yet, did anybody step back and say, "Wait a minute, we have this huge institution. We have so many. I think with at least 1,000 people who are housed there. Willowbrook didn't become Willowbrook because you had 1,000 people under one roof. Willowbrook became Willowbrook because they didn't have support. They didn't have the staff. They didn't have the systems. They didn't have the protocols. They didn't have the oversight in place, right? You
Mhm.
can achieve so much more through economies of scale, exactly the way that you mentioned, which is, if I look at, housing today, an operating budget for one person in a home is going to be, in my opinion, between $200,000 and $250,000. That's just to cover utilities, property taxes, a whole range of other things for that physical space. Now, if I was able to put 4 people in that same space, it's not going to be $1 million. It actually might drop down to being $400,000 or $500,000 because we can spread that across 4 different people, and then we'd have more money left over to bring in adequate staff. Now, the reality is that there are parents who can't afford that, right? OPWDD, if you do a self-directed budget, will give you 25-30% less than what they'll give a certified residential. I wonder why. Why is it that whatever money is allocated for a person, be it in a residential, quote unquote nonprofit residential, that same money should travel with that person if they choose a self-directed solution. So why are these things done this way? What are the economics? Who's getting the benefit of this? And why is it that the common sense approach doesn't seem to attack the politicians? And so we're also keeping at Safe Care that in mind, that we don't have a lot of people out there who have the means to be able to create this for themselves. And there are going to be a lot of people who can't afford the cost of doing this. So to address that, we're committed at Safe Care. Hopefully at some point we become profitable, but we're committed to donating a portion of our profits, and we want to create a foundation for hope. And that foundation for hope will be designed to address the funding challenges that some families will have. We want the foundation to have little to no overhead. I don't want every dollar that goes in, I don't want $8 to go towards paying staff or paying administrative costs. In fact, I would love it if in this foundation parents came and volunteered their time. We have lawyers, we have doctors, we have accountants, we have plumbers, we have electricians out there who are brilliant people who have kids in this space. Come and volunteer. Come and join forces with us. Help us create a foundation like this. Let's go raise money from corporations that flap their gums to say that they care about this community. Well, care enough by showing us what your daughters can do, right? We want fundraising across, parents to the community. We want to help people who cannot afford, the full cost of this. And if there are shortfalls, we want this foundation to plug that gap. Now, it's not something that is going to happen overnight. Again, I'm not in it for the next 1 or 2 years. This is a marathon, people. We're going to be fighting this fight for the next 20, 30 years. And, Heather, I want to highlight that point you made, which is, today parents see, they're hamstrung, they're in a box because they may feel afraid to speak up. I just say to them, I said, listen, if this is the stuff that's happening while you are around, what do you think is going to happen to your child once you're gone? And that's the thing that makes me sometimes have sleepless nights. Because if this happened, and Anderson knows who I am, Anderson knows that we were one of the most vocal parents. If this could happen to our son in that context, and we never discovered it, what would have happened to him once we left this planet? So parents, remember that. You have to advocate for them in the here and now, so that when we are not here, they have a safe environment. They have something, a platform. They're in a system that will take care of them, regardless of whether or not the parents are there to have oversight.
Thank you so much, Anil, because that brings it all together. And as we close out the show, I agree. That's what families walk away with, that piece. It's hard to speak up sometimes, but the sayings, even if your voice shakes, right? It's almost in the moments that feel the most tense is when we have to speak the most, because there's something really critical in the stage that we're in right now. So talk to legislators. It's budget season. Let them know what the priorities are for our community, but also lean on one another. Find your community partners, the local organizations who are going to rally with you. Steve is an excellent collaborator, bringing in the veterans or the Office for the Aging or all these different people really make a difference. So thank you, Anil, for sharing an update about your son, to talk about the direction that you're working on right now with Shaw to really help other families that are in this position. And I hope that we have even another update coming up.
Yeah, Neil, thank you.
Again, thanks to Stephen, to yourself for doing this good work and getting the word out. This is something that truly will only happen if we work together as a community.
Yeah, thanks, Anil, and thank Shal too. We're the cavalry. Nobody's coming to save us. So anything that any of us can do ourselves to make this better is going to move the needle. And like I said, we're the ones that can force the change and be the change agents. And for our audience out there, this episode will be out there. We just updated our website. We have merch and all that kind of stuff. And again, Anil, thank you so very much for telling your story. We're glad to be a part of it. And till next time.
Continue the conversation by joining our Facebook group. If you're a fan of the show, please join our supporters club. Subscribe on YouTube, rate and review on your favorite listening app, but most of all, share it with your friends. Just one more click or comment can make a huge difference and help us to continue finding common ground.